Whether you're a parent navigating myofunctional disorders or simply curious about optimizing your family's health, the MyoHacker Podcast is your guide. Hi, I'm Karindy Ong, a speech-language pathologist, myofunctional therapist, and mom on a mission to bring holistic health to you and your family. Together, we'll explore whole-body connections and integrative solutions. Please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review to help other families discover this podcast. Content shared in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests do not necessarily reflect those of the podcast or its affiliates. This podcast does not provide medical, legal, or professional advice. Visit myohackerslp.com for free guides and access to my online community and courses. Now, let's dive into today's episode. This question, it gets my heart a little bit. Okay, so the question is, I have 3 kids and I'm pretty sure they all need myo and maybe expansion. Is there anything I can do right now that is free that can help my kids while we save up money? Yes, I love equipping families with things you can do right now that are free. So I want to first remove the guilt that parents feel surrounding the topic of Airway. I want us to instead embrace that we can do things right now, today, that really move us into a place of breathing, we're connecting, we're moving, and we are making progress. Okay, so don't feel burdened. Instead, what I want is that we start thinking about how we are living our lives. Are we living indoor mostly? Are we living outdoor? We want to really set that foundation for best health we can have by getting our kids outside. Okay, so when we are outside, especially if we can really encourage contact with nature, like sitting in the grass, getting dirty, climbing trees, all of that, just moving our bodies dynamically, that's where we get whole body movement that is really beneficial for proprioceptive awareness, which proprioception is the awareness of weight, like of our body against gravity, so that we're sitting upright. It's also a great way when we're out and we're crawling and we're moving and we're climbing and we have these dynamic movements. That's also a time that we can get more vestibular input, which is that feeling, that sensation of if you're swinging, if you're moving back and forth. So we are getting a lot of input in the brain and through our nervous system for proprioception, which is that deep weight bearing sensation, for vestibular input. And as we start to get away from synthetic smells and textures and just all these things that are fake in our environment, we are actually able to downregulate our nervous system a little bit. And then that's when we can actually feel what we are feeling. So that sensation of being hungry or full, that tends to be, that's interoception. And if we are getting so much stimulation on the outside, whether it's bright lights, it's blue lights, it's different, like I said, scents, smells, just all these things that are coming in that are so much louder than the signals we get within our bodies, we tune out. This just stepping outside changes the type of information that the body is being bombarded with. So it is so much easier to train the body on things like tongue placement if we have bodily awareness of just what we are feeling within ourselves. Are we feeling hungry, full, cold, nervous, any of these things? It's going to be that interoception. And that also helps us tune in with placement within the body, like the tongue. Is it at midline? This is going to be more of a proprioceptive awareness when it comes to the tongue itself. But I will argue that if you are not tuned into your body from an interoceptive standpoint, so that means like the sensations of your movement in your GI tract, things like that, like our body just gives us input from that. If we are so tuned out from what is happening there, it's really hard to be aware of how we're breathing, how we're moving our tongue, how we are eating, all of these things. It's just, we're just like on autopilot and moving through the motions because the inputs around us in our environment that are not nature, they are just so fast. It's the tiny movements of our GI system, they can't compete with the big loud noises of TV and the bright lights and all of these things. So it's wildly effective to get your children, to get our children outside and slow down that pace and that information overload so they can start tuning in to their bodies, to their sensations, starts changing movement, starts opening up the whole fascia system. It helps them to look up, which is so good for the body. It helps them to shift weight, which is also going to increase that awareness of, like I said, the tongue, how it's moving in the body. The takeaway there are lots of other things you can do that are free too. I have challenges on Instagram. I have 2 different challenges in there that show things that people can do. And one, if you look in the highlights, it says Myo Outside. And I show all of these exercises and things that people can do just outside. Okay. And they work. And the reason I know they work is because that's what I had to do with my kids. As I was learning these things years ago, I tried to take them into myofunctional therapy, and I wanted them, because I was learning. So I was like, I don't trust myself. I want someone else to be in charge of their therapy. But I tried to get them into the clinic, and they saw the dum-dums at the front of the clinic, and they lost their mind. All the dyes, all the sweets, they couldn't. It was not fun to take them there, and we just had too many meltdowns and everything else. So I was like, well, we're not going to do that then. So instead, I was doing myofunctional therapy with them at the park, because they were in a place that was more regulated and more bodily aware when we were at the park, and they had the input they needed. A lot of this, they need that vestibular input. So they're on the swing. Suddenly they're more in tune with sticking their tongue out and pulling it back. As we swing forward, I have them stick their tongue out. Whoa, there it is. It's going out. And then as we pull back, I have them retract their tongue and pull it back. So it goes in their mouth. Where'd it go? Where'd your tongue go? Things like that, giving them that kind of playfulness. And then, for getting the back of the tongue to go up, when there's a posterior tongue tie, that can be very difficult. And so, especially if kids can get irritated and frustrated when it's a difficult task, if you suddenly add in an element that, okay, I need you to bring the back of your tongue up, and we teach that in different ways, but have them click, and they're not able to click, but you pull in, they're doing a froggy jump. And so now they're on all fours and they're jumping up and down, and now they're clicking. Maybe their clicks aren't perfect, but they're going to keep trying because it's fun. It's also, they have a stronger signal of what it feels like to have connection between tissues. So what does that mean, connection between tissues? Like their joints are getting a lot of input from that impact of jumping and bouncing and squatting and then jumping up. That contraction and release is sending signal awareness to the brain of how muscles are coordinating their movements, of how the body is distributing weight across the midline. These are really powerful interventions. So I would argue there's a lot you can do that is fabulous before you get into myofunctional therapy. And I do want your family to be able to access that for sure. Those are the free things. Actually, this transitions pretty well into this next question, because we're going to talk about chewing and eating. And this is also something that is free. We'll just jump into the question. My 3-year-old only eats soft foods, but they are doing great with weight gain. Is this a problem? Okay, so ideally, we want them eating hard foods that encourage bone growth, that encourage the movement of the tongue. And there are different movements of the tongue. So, we tend to think of like, you stick your tongue out or you don't. I don't know. That's what a lot of people sort of think of with the tongue. But we have cupping. So what that means is the tongue is able to sort of make this bowl shape. And that's how we control food on the top of the tongue. And when we get that cupping shape, we're able to then elevate, control, and it's the combination. So I don't want to lose people with getting too much in the weeds and the details of how we swallow. But there are movements of the tongue, and we have a lot of muscles. It's not just one. And they all coordinate to control what we have on the top of the tongue. And that's how we get this safe swallow. It then moves to the back, and we have then the soft palate, and it comes together, and it's this suction force that helps move things down. If, let's say, we have a posterior tongue tie, which what that means is The tongue, you can stick it out most of the time, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can get the back of the tongue to go up into the palate and in contact there. So when that happens, that is tricky for that swallow contact, but it also means that we have a harder time of sweeping the tongue, specifically the tongue tip, maybe to the back teeth to clean out food, or we are having a harder time with that coordination to keep all the food on the top of the tongue. So without getting too clinical, what can happen is our bodies go, this is kind of risky. We're chewing foods, we're bringing them in, especially if we have a gag that's hypersensitive. She didn't mention that. But if, let's say, food gets kind of far back and the tongue never moved around to desensitize the mouth, then all of a sudden you're bringing food in there and whoa, that feels dangerous. That didn't feel good. That was very stimulating and the body can shut down. We can also have it where, it feels like a danger to the airway. So instead, a child might just go, I want purees. I just want puree pouches forever because I know what to do with that. It goes, in the middle of my tongue and then I swallow it back and we're good. Or they get dissolvable solids. That's something too. We tend to see this munch chew pattern where they bring the food to the front of the mouth and it's just chomping down right in the front and not getting that contact in the back, which we want it to be in the back because we want to be developing those strong facial bones and the strong mandible. We want that. It also trains our tongue to move side to side to whatever we're chewing back there. So it's very important that we're getting those movements and coordinating that. So all that to say, this actually just tie back into that first question about what are some free things we can do at home. Working on eating harder foods is something that's amazing. Now, if we have a feeding aversion, what that means is it's a stronger battle than just, there are some kids, it's like, well, of course that's what they prefer, but if you offer them other things and they're hungry, they will eat other things. Then you have some kids that have what we call more of like a truly picky eating habit and an aversion, and they will not eat those things. And that is where it's wonderful to bring in a feeding therapist. I love working with feeding OTs, SLPs. We work on these things from more of a sensory motor standpoint, building up that sensory system and then targeting that motor coordination and then the emotional aspects of it, of building that in so that they feel safe, they feel in control and empowered. And it makes a big difference when they have that oral motor control to be able to safely control the food in their mouth. So that makes a huge difference if we can get them just eating some stronger food. So sometimes, foods are going to be too challenging to start with. This is where I love the side biter. It's by Gnosh, Gnosh. It's a silicone feeder that has little holes in it. And you can use that. And so they get to have that sensation of chewing on something where they get little particulates. They get crumbs of something, but it's not an overwhelming amount. So they feel like they can really control it. That's a great tool. You want to bring it to the sides of the mouth, not to the back. And they do have different sizes. And you'll see that, like, let's say I'm working with a kiddo that has really high anxiety. I'll start with the level 1 that doesn't have any holes in the silicone tube. So what that means is I will put some food in there. They'll see it and they're like, no way. But first, we're maybe tapping their face or we're dipping it in applesauce and then we're drawing with it. And then I let them bring it up to their mouth gradually. It kind of depends on the amount of resistance they have. And then they're chewing on it and they get to see that food. They're chewing on it and not getting any input in their mouth. Like nothing's breaking off. They're okay. They survived. They felt okay. It builds that confidence and reduces that anxiety. So they had it in their mouth, but nothing came out of that tube. Then we can move up to the next level that has 5 holes in it. And so they're chewing on it. It's kind of scary. They kind of feel some stuff. They're not sure, but it's a small enough amount that they're able to control it. It's more compatible with just their saliva. And then we move up to the next level, which is going to be 10 holes in it. And they're chewing that and breaking that down. So that is a wonderful way to build that up. You can also use like milkshake straws and put foods in there and they chew on it, or this is getting more into feeding therapy. So if you're needing to use these kinds of steps, I would highly recommend finding a feeding therapist. You can go to my website and I have resources, directories there. You can sign up to find like where are these therapists, but one that you could check out right now, you can go to Airway Circle, the Airway Circle directory. You can also go to Hallie Bolkin's website. She has Feed the Peds, and she has therapists that are listed there. Those are great resources just to get started. Talk tools as well. These are great directories if you're like, I'm at my wit's end. And, depending on the age and the needs, it might be an OT, it might be an SLP that you're working with, but you want to get that support. So if you're needing to put some yogurt in a milkshake straw and freeze it to help them with chewing, I would say you probably want to work with a feeding therapist to build up that oral motor coordination and control. But sometimes you just don't know. So now you know what these things are that we want to be working on. Obviously, I love chewy tubes. You can see those on my recommendations page. The yellow one is usually what you're going to start with if it's kind of that you want the easier level of difficulty. If they're not chewing on anything, then you want to be starting with some light things that they get to just mash with. And that can be, starting with dissolvable solids. Sometimes we're bringing those to the sides of the mouth. And so they bit it and it immediately broke through, but they're getting practice of chewing on the sides instead of the front of the mouth. And so that's going to be that transition. So get them outside. And you know what? I always see that kids are more adventurous eating outside. So whatever it is, especially if you warm up the hands first, the system's on board and it's ready to coordinate and learn and try new things and be more adventurous from coordination standpoint, from a feeding standpoint. And when they get outside, they definitely get hungry. So bring the different snacks, play with them. Don't get discouraged. As you work on this, it can be a challenge. And the fact that you're trying anything, that you're working on it at all and asking this question means that you're doing the right things. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the MyoHacker Podcast. Remember, small changes can have big impacts on our overall health and well-being. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate and review the show wherever you get your podcasts so more people can learn about the show. Head on over to myohackerslp.com for in-depth resources, free guides, and access to my online courses. You can also join the fun on Instagram at MyoHackerSLP for bonus content and updates. And if you have questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, please send me a message. I would love to hear from you. Until next time, let's biohack myofunctional health as myohackers who change the world through intentional action and connection. Quick disclaimer. The content shared in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests do not necessarily reflect those of the podcast or its affiliates. This podcast does not provide medical, legal, or professional advice. Always consult with appropriate professionals regarding your individual circumstances. By listening, you agree that the host and podcast are not responsible for any actions you may take based on the information provided. We encourage critical thinking and urge listeners to verify any claims or statements made during the show. Your mental and physical well-being are important to us, so please listen responsibly and prioritize your health and safety. Thank you again, and MyoHack on.